So Simple tutorial.
Good morning students. Welcome to SST So Simple tutorial. This is Vijay Singh, your social science teacher for grades 9 and 10. Today we are going to do one short revision of the lesson Russian Revolution. In the previous lesson we had learned that the society was divided into states. The aristocracy and the church controlled economic and social power. But after the revolution, it seemed possible to change this scenario. People in Europe and Asia now began discussing individual rights and that who would control social power. Some wanted to change the society. Some others wanted to bring radical change of society. Still others wished for the change, but gradually. So let us revise liberals, radicals and conservatives first. Liberals wanted a nation that tolerated all religions. They opposed the uncontrolled powers of dynastic rulers. They wanted to safeguard the rights of individuals against governments. They wanted an elected parliamentary government. But they did not believe in universal adult franchise. They were not in favor of voting rights for women. On the other hand, radicals wanted a nation in which the government was based on the majority of a country's population. They opposed the privileges of landowners and wealthy factory owners. They did not like the concentration of property in the hands of a few. They supported women's suffragette movement. Conservatives were opposed to both the liberals and the radicals. They believed in the old traditions and beliefs. Later, they accepted that some changes were inevitable. Therefore, changes had to be brought, but gradually. The emergence of socialism in Europe can be traced back to the 19th century. Socialists were opposed to private property. They believed that if the society as a whole controlled property, more attention would be paid to collective social interests. Robert Owen was one such socialist who believed in the idea of cooperatives. Louis Blanc was another socialist who felt that cooperatives could be built only if governments encouraged them. Then another gentleman was Karl Marx. He believed that an industrial society was capitalist in nature, and the institutions operating under its control were designed to exploit the workers and keep the profits for themselves. He also believed that the workers had to reconstruct a radically socialist society where all property was socially controlled. The idea of Marx was at the root of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. Let us now go to Russia in 1914. In 1914, Russia was ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. You can see the Tsar and Tsarina Alexandra together. This is Winter Palace, which served as the royal residence of the Russian Tsars. Russia was then a vast multi-ethnic empire. You can see Russia in green color. Look at the enlarged map now. This is Baltic Sea. St. Petersburg is here. It is a port city in the Baltic Sea and located on the delta of River Neva. This city played a vital role in Russian history. Till 1918, it was the capital of the Russian Empire. This very city was the scene of the February and October revolutions of 1917. Besides territories around Moscow, the empire included many current-day countries like Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, parts of Poland, Belarus, Ukraine. Between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, you can see Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, etc. So vast was the expanse of the empire. The religion was predominantly Russian Orthodoxy Christianity. The economy was basically agrarian there. 85% of the population was dependent on agriculture. Peasants cultivated most of the lands in villages. They had no respect for the nobility. They often refused to pay rent to them. They wanted the lands of the nobles to be given to them. One peculiar feature found in Russia was that the peasants pooled their lands together periodically and their commune used to divide the land according to the needs of individual families. As far as industries are concerned, industries were very less and found mostly in St. Petersburg and Moscow. They were owned by private individuals. Working hours used to be very long, up to 15 hours. Workers used to live in rooms or dormitories and slept in shifts. They could not keep their families with them. Workers resorted to strikes frequently for some workers' dismissal or for disagreements with the employers. As far as political parties are concerned, they were illegal before 1914. Let us see what happened in 1905. Russia was an autocracy and Tsar was not answerable to the parliament. The liberals wanted to change this situation. 1904 was a bad year for Russian workers. Prices of essential goods rose. Their real wages declined by 20%. There was discontent among the workers, so the government established a legal trade union in St. Petersburg called the Assembly of Russian Workers. It was led by Father Gapon. One day, 4 members of the Assembly of Russian Workers were dismissed at the Putilov Iron Works. Consequently, over 10,000 workers went on strike. They demanded an 8-hour work schedule, an increase in wages, and improvement in working conditions. So Father Gapon prepared a petition and led a march of workers to present it to the Tsar. When they reached the Winter Palace, the procession was attacked by the police and the Cossacks. Over 100 workers were killed and 300 injured. This incident is known as Bloody Sunday. The most significant effect of the Bloody Sunday was the drastic change in attitude of the Russian workers and peasants. Previously, they had faith in the Tsar. Generally, in dire situations, the masses would appeal to the Tsar through a petition, and the Tsar would respond to the people promising to set things right. But this killing resulted in a surge of bitterness towards Nicholas and his autocratic rule. This incident then started a series of events which came to be called the Revolution of 1905. Strikes were organized all over the country. Student bodies staged walkouts. Universities were closed. Professionals like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and middle class formed the Union of Unions and demanded a constituent assembly. The Tsar, however, agreed reluctantly for the creation of Duma, though he continued to believe that he was responsible only to the God. The Duma's power was very limited, and Nicholas continued to hold the ruling authority. Furthermore, he could dissolve the Duma, which he did 3 times in order to get rid of the opposition. So, the liberal experiment failed. The First World War broke out in 1914. Russia entered the war in support of the Serbs and their allies. Russia's economy was not prepared for the war. Militarily, Russia was no match for Germany. They lacked modern weaponry. The Russian army suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of Germany. The Germans and Austrians unified their command and were able to successfully rout Russian forces. They were forced to retreat. By 1917, there were more than 7 million casualties. There were over 4 million refugees. Soldiers did not wish to fight the war. So, the war was a total disaster for Russia. The Tsar became very unpopular. Let us now revise the next topic, the February Revolution in Petrograd. See, there had been problems to which the Tsar was very indifferent. There was a shortage of food. The poor were forced to live from hand to mouth. The Tsar took no effective steps for removing the scarcity of commodities in the market. So people decided to adopt the path of revolution. On 22nd February, a lockout took place in the factory on the right bank. On 23rd, workers in 50 factories called a strike on sympathy. They shouted slogans against the bureaucratic officials and the Tsar. The government called out the cavalry and police to keep an eye on the protesters. On the 25th, the Tsar dissolved the Duma in anger. The members of Duma also rose in revolt against the Tsar. On the 27th, the Tsar ordered the cavalry to fire on the demonstrators. the cavalry refused to fire, and by the evening, soldiers and striking workers gathered to form a Soviet in the building where Duma met. On the 2nd of March, the Tsar abdicated the throne of Russia. Thus, the family of the Romanovs, who ruled Russia for more than 300 years, came to an end. The Soviet and Duma leaders formed a provisional government to run the country. Army officials, landowners, and industrialists were influential in this government. Restrictions on public meetings and associations were removed. It introduced several reforms in different fields of life. Next, what happened after February? In April 1917, the main hero Lenin returned to Russia from his exile. He and his Bolshevik party had opposed the war since 1914. So he declared that the war be ended. He also declared that the land be transferred to the peasants and banks to be nationalized. He felt that it was time to take over power. But most others in the party suggested that time was not ripe for socialist revolution now. They wanted the provisional government to continue for some more time. Meanwhile, the workers' movement spread. Trade unions grew in number. Soldiers' committees were formed in the army. Lenin, who was fully supported by the peasants and workers, was propagating against the Kerensky government. The provisional government views these developments as the growing influence of the Bolsheviks and an erosion of his powers. The demonstrations led by the Bolsheviks were sternly repressed. Many Bolshevik leaders had to go hiding. Many of them fled as well. As the conflict between the provisional government and the Bolsheviks grew, Lenin feared that the provisional government would set up a dictatorship. So Lenin decided to strike. On 16th of October, Lenin convinced the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. A military revolutionary committee was appointed under Trotsky to organize the seizure. The uprising began on 24th October. On one side, military men loyal to the government seized the building of the Bolshevik newspapers. Troops took over telephone and telegraph offices. Troops were also sent to protect the Winter Palace. On the other side, the Military Revolutionary Committee sent its supporters to seize government offices and arrest ministers. Anyways, by the night, ministers had surrendered and Petrograd came under the control of revolutionaries. There was heavy fighting, especially in Moscow, but by December, the Bolsheviks controlled the Moscow-Petrograd area. Let us now see what changes came after the socialist takeover. Most of the banks and industries were nationalized. The government took over its management and ownership. Land was declared a social property. In cities, large houses were partitioned as per family requirements. The Bolshevik Party was renamed Russian Communist Party. Dear students, the Russian monarchy ended with the abdication of Tsar during the February Revolution. Thereafter, the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government in the October Revolution and seized power. This seizure of power was not universally accepted and the country descended into a civil war. So this civil war was basically a result of the emergence of opposition against the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, were called the Reds. The opposition group included the pro-Tsarists called Whites. The Bolsheviks also faced opposition from the socialist revolutionaries who had a different vision for a socialist Russia. They were called the Greens. Among other opponents were the nobles whose lands had been given to the peasants. The Allies were also worried at the growth of socialism in Russia, so the French, American, British and Japanese troops fully backed the anti-Bolshevik forces. During this period of civil war, Russia fell into chaos. But with the support and cooperation of the Muslim jihadists and non-Russian nationalities, Bolsheviks succeeded and controlled most of the former Russian Empire by January 1920. Thereafter, Lenin created the USSR from the Russian Empire in 1922. Most non-Russian nationalities were given autonomy in the USSR. Although Lenin succeeded in repressing his opponents, he was worried about the deteriorating economic conditions of Russia. Unfortunately, the hero of Bolshevik revolution could not live long and died in January 1924. He was succeeded by Stalin. In 1925, a planning commission was appointed to consider the economic problems of the country. A process of centralized planning was introduced. Centralized planning led to economic growth. The Commission recommended the framing of the 5-year plans. The 5-year plans achieved great success. Industrial production increased between 1927 and 1933 by 100% in case of oil, coal, and steel. Initially, workers led a hard life, but then Stalin provided free and compulsory education for all children. Cheap healthcare was provided by the government. Creches were made in factories for the benefit of women workers. Let us go to the next topic, collectivization of agriculture. There was an acute shortage of grain supplies in the towns in 1927-28. Stalin's collectivization program was an effort to solve the grain crisis. Small holdings of land were jointed together. The individual farming was abolished completely. All peasants were forced to cultivate in the collective farms called kolkhoz. Collective farms were supplied with trained personnel and farm machinery. Collective farms were encouraged by the government by granting them special privileges like tax deductions and easy credits. Those who opposed this policy were punished. However, this did not produce the desired results. So what was the impact of Russian Revolution on Russia? Private property in the means of production was abolished. Land and other means of production were declared the property of state. All the banks, insurance companies, mines, railways, etc. were nationalized. With the growth of industrial and agricultural production, poverty started to disappear and the country moved on the path of prosperity. The economic policy adopted by the government made Russia a major power in the world. A backward country had become a great power. Illiteracy was wiped out. The Russians got security of their jobs. Much was done to improve the health of the people. Equality was attained for men and women in all spheres. The communists made Russia a great power, but the negative aspect of all this was that the liberty of people were denied in the process. What about its influence in the world? Communist parties were formed in many countries of the world to achieve a similar objective. USSR was hailed as the leader of the world communist movement. The Russian revolutionaries had hoped that there would be revolutions all over the world, but that did not happen. The Bolsheviks encouraged the colonial people to follow their experiment. The Russian Revolution prompted governments all over the world to do necessary reforms to improve the conditions of workers. The meaning underlying is that mere political democracy has no meaning without social and economic equality. Thus finishes the revision of the lesson Rise of Socialism and the Russian Revolution. If you think it was useful to you, please like and subscribe to it. Thank you and Jai Hind.